After I paid my son's college tuition in full, my ex-wife invited me to dinner. That should have been the first sign something was wrong. Vanessa did not invite me anywhere unless she believed she controlled the room, the timing, and the story people would tell afterward. She was the kind of woman who could smile while setting fire to your life, then look offended by the smoke. Still, I went. Because my son was leaving for college in 6 days, and fathers like me learn to walk into uncomfortable places if the child they love is sitting inside. I paid the tuition that afternoon from my kitchen table in Columbus, Ohio. $43,000 in change. Tuition, housing, meal plan, books, laptop, orientation fees, all of it. I remember staring at the payment confirmation longer than I needed to, feeling sick and proud at the same time. Sick because that kind of money hurts when you are not rich. Proud because Eli had earned every bit of it. He texted me right after. "Thanks, Dad. I know it's a lot." I texted back, "Go be better than me." He sent a laughing emoji and wrote, "That bar's not as low as you think." That made me smile. Vanessa called 11 minutes later. Her voice was calm, warm, even. That was how she sounded when she wanted something from people who had finally learned not to trust her. "Mom's having a small family dinner for Eli before he leaves," she said. "You should come." A small family dinner at Lorraine's house. With Vanessa saying you should come in that pleasant voice people use when they are trying to make a trap sound like an honor. I almost said no. I should have said no. But hope makes decent men do dumb things long after wisdom should have cured them. By 6:30, I was in Lorraine's driveway looking at a line of parked cars and telling myself it was probably exactly what Vanessa said it was. A family dinner, one last meal before college, a chance for Eli to feel supported before he left. That lie lasted until I stepped inside. Lorraine was in her armchair near the fireplace, wearing pearls indoors like judgment had a dress code. Celia stood by the mantel with a wine glass, already looking bored in the way people do when they're really waiting for trouble to become entertaining. Two cousins hovered near the hallway, pretending they were not there to witness whatever was coming. Trent opened the door with that thin smile he always wore when he sensed tension and wanted front row seats, while pretending he didn't. And there was Eli. The second he saw me, his whole face changed. "Dad." He crossed the room and hugged me hard. Not politely, not because people were watching. A real hug. Strong, quick, honest. That word should have protected the rest of the night. It didn't. Dinner was awkward, but not unusually so. Lorraine made one small jab about certain people enjoying the spotlight when they pay for things. Celia smiled into her wine like cruelty was a private joke. Vanessa moved around the table pouring sweet tea, passing dishes, and playing gracious so well that anyone who didn't know her would have thought she was trying to hold a fractured family together. That was Vanessa's gift. She could make manipulation look like management. Eli sat beside me and quietly asked if the tuition payment had gone through. "It did," I said. He nodded and looked down at his plate for a second before saying, "Thank you." I leaned closer so only he could hear me. "Go to school, work hard. Don't thank me like I donated a kidney." That got a small smile out of him. Across the table, I saw Vanessa watching us, not warmly, carefully, like she was measuring something. That should have been the second sign. After dinner, people carried dessert into the living room. Peach cobbler, coffee, fake small talk. I had a plate in my hand and no appetite. Eli sat beside me on the couch and said under his breath, "Mom's acting weird." I almost laughed. That sentence could have covered half our marriage, but he was right. She was too controlled, too centered, not relaxed. "Ready." Then she stood in the middle of the room and cleared her throat. Conversation died immediately. She looked first at Eli, then at me, then around the room, making sure every eye was where she wanted it. It was such a small thing, but I knew that move. She was not gathering courage. She was checking the stage. "I know this may feel sudden," she said, "but before Eli starts this next chapter of his life, there's something he deserves to know." My heartbeat slowed. That was the part I remember most clearly. Not panic, not shock. Just the strange calm that comes when a thing you feared for years finally walks through the door wearing the exact face you expected. Vanessa turned to our son and said, "Daniel is not your biological father." The room went still, real still. Not polite silence, dead silence. The kind that has weight. Eli looked at her first, then at me, and I watched the meaning hit him in pieces. Confusion, disbelief, fear, then the first cut of betrayal. Vanessa kept talking because she had prepared for this. "I never wanted it to come out like this," she said, which was a lie so shameless I almost admired the nerve. "But I can't let him leave for college living under a false assumption." False assumption. That was how she reduced 20 years of my life in one sentence. Eli turned to me. "Dad?" I looked at him. Only him. And I said, "She's telling you the truth about one part." Vanessa's face changed instantly. That was the moment her plan started breaking. She had expected denial, anger, shouting. She had expected me to panic and make myself look unstable in a room already tilted in her favor. Instead, I reached into my jacket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope I had carried for 7 years. The second she saw it, all the color left her face. There is no performance on earth quite like a manipulative person unexpectedly confronting evidence. "You should have told the whole room," I said quietly. "Especially the part I found out years ago." Eli stared at me. "You knew?" "Yes." "For how long?" 7 years. The pain on his face was immediate and honest. "You knew for 7 years and never told me?" "No." His voice shook. "Why?" There are moments when the whole truth is too large to open at once, so I gave him the center of it first. "Because finding out didn't change how I felt about you. That didn't comfort him." It hurt him differently. Vanessa stepped in fast, trying to seize the wheel before the car was fully lost. "Daniel, stop. Eli deserves the truth, not your version of it." I looked at her and laughed once, because if I didn't, I was going to say something uglier. "You called a family meeting after my tuition payment cleared," I said. "You waited until I paid his college bill to do this. Don't wrap strategy in the language of honesty while I'm standing here." That landed, not because she agreed, because everyone in the room had felt the timing too, and I had just forced it into words. Eli turned to her. "Is that true?" She hesitated. That pause answered more than any sentence she would have chosen next. I opened the envelope, DNA results on top, a letter underneath, and I said, "I found out when you were 13. I told him about the affair, plainly, no speech, no self-pity. The late nights, the changed passwords, the message on her tablet from a man saying last night was worth every risk, the investigator, the receipts, the photos." The sentence Vanessa hurled at me during one of our ugliest fights. "Maybe he's more his than yours anyway." That sentence planted the doubt. The DNA test confirmed it. Eli stood there in his grandmother's living room learning the kind of truth no child should ever have to learn with an audience. And when the lab results came back, I said, "They said I was not your biological father." He looked like the floor had moved under him. Then he asked the question that mattered most. "And you stayed?" Vanessa tried to speak. "I got there first." "Yes," I said. "I stayed." I told him the truth in front of everyone because if Vanessa wanted public, then public was finally going to stop protecting her. "I could have left," I said. "I could have gone to court. I could have walked away and told myself I was the victim and therefore entitled to disappear. But you were 13. You still forgot your lunch. You still looked for me in the stands at your games. You still called me when storms got loud. I sat in my truck with those test results and asked myself whether I loved you because of blood or because you were my son. And the answer was so clear it made me ashamed I had to ask." Eli cried then, not loudly, not for effect, just like someone trying not to break open in front of people he no longer trusted. Vanessa cried too, but by then nobody in that room confused tears with innocence anymore. Then I pulled out the letter, Marcus Bell's letter, the man Vanessa had an affair with, the man who died years earlier, the man who might have been Eli's biological father. Vanessa had always been more afraid of that letter than the DNA test. The DNA test said I wasn't Eli's biological father. The letter proved she had known there was uncertainty, and chose to manage it rather than face it. I read it out loud. Marcus admitted the affair, admitted Vanessa told him there was a chance Eli was his son, admitted that when he pushed for the truth, she shut him out, threatened him, and refused certainty. He wrote that he had once watched Eli from a distance at a baseball field and saw him run straight to me after the game. He wrote that in that moment, he understood that whatever blood said, I was the father in every way that mattered. Then I read the line that turned the room cold. She said she would rather let you believe a lie forever than risk losing the life she built. Vanessa looked like she wanted the floor to open. Eli looked at her and asked, "When were you ever going to tell me?" She said she didn't know how. He answered, "You seem to know how tonight." It was not a loud sentence. It was worse than loud. Then he asked to see the DNA test. I handed it to him. He read it, read the letter, read both, again like maybe the words would rearrange into something survivable. Then he looked at his mother and asked, "Did you ever tell him thank you?" She couldn't answer. That silence was the ugliest thing I'd heard all evening. A few minutes later, Eli walked out of that house with me. Vanessa followed us into the driveway, trying every version of herself she had left. Hurt mother, misunderstood woman, person under impossible pressure. Lorraine snapped that nobody should make permanent decisions in an emotional state. Eli turned to her and said, "I already lost enough time. I'm leaving with Dad." That word again. Dad. He said it after everything. He said it while standing in the ruins of Vanessa's plan. It still wasn't the end. On the drive back to my house, he sat in silence for most of it. Then he asked the question that opened the next door. If Marcus Bell was my biological father, then why did Mom panic when she saw the envelope? I drove another half-mile before answering, because the DNA results weren't the only thing inside. I told him more about Marcus's letter. Told him Marcus wasn't even sure because Vanessa refused a test and kept moving the story to wherever it best protected her. Told him Marcus wrote before he died because he no longer trusted her version of anything. Then Eli asked the question I had been afraid of for years. What did Mom mean when she threatened to make me find out what kind of man you were before you married her? That was the point where I had to open my own graveyard. At my house, after Murphy nearly tackled Eli with joy the second he walked in, I pulled a metal lockbox from the top shelf of the hall closet and set it on the coffee table. Inside was the part of my life Vanessa had used for years like leverage. At 24, long before I met her, I was arrested after a bar fight. That sentence sounds smaller than the truth. I grew up angry. Poor house, drunk father, tired mother. Every man around me acted like violence was a language and pain was proof of masculinity. One night outside a bar, I stepped in when 3 men were harassing a waitress. That part was real. That part was right. Then I kept going after the threat had ended. 1 man hit the curb. Another needed surgery. I was arrested, charged, spent 2 nights in county, and pled down to felony assault. Suspended sentence, probation, counseling, anger management. A criminal record I deserved and spent years trying to become better than. I showed Eli the incident report, the newspaper clipping, Vanessa's handwritten note. If you ever tell Eli the truth, I'll make sure he learns what kind of man you really were before you married me. That was how she kept me quiet. That was how she kept me ashamed. She knew I had changed, but she also knew shame does not care how many years have passed. She knew I could survive strangers judging me more easily than I could survive my son hearing that story from her mouth first. I told him everything, not the cleaned up version, the real one, that I stayed after the DNA results because I loved him. But not only because I loved him, also because I was afraid of losing him, afraid of Vanessa painting me as unstable, afraid of her turning my worst chapter into the lens through which he saw all of me. He listened to all of it. Then he asked, "Did you ever hit anybody again?" "No." "Did you ever get arrested again?" "No." "Did you ever come close?" "A few times emotionally," I said. "Never physically." He sat with that. Then he said something I did not deserve but will carry until I die. "You are that man. The one I thought you were." I told him the only honest thing I could. Most days I worked very hard to become him. That mattered to him. I could see it. Because boys are told men arrive finished, they don't. Most of us drag ourselves toward decency, one corrected mistake at a time. We thought the worst of the night was behind us, then my phone buzzed. Voicemail from Trent. I played it. After Eli and I left Lorraine's house, Vanessa and her mother started arguing for real, not performing, not controlling the room. Real panic. And Trent heard Lorraine say, if he ever finds out what we took out of that box after Marcus died, we're finished. The safety deposit box. I had forgotten about the old bank receipt I found years earlier in Vanessa's paperwork. When I asked her about it back then, she brushed it off and said it had something to do with Lorraine's jewelry during a plumbing issue. It sounded thin at the time. Now it sounded like the kind of lie people tell when they are relying on your fatigue more than your trust. Eli and I went straight into my home office and dug through old files until we found the receipt. Columbus Federal. Trust, Box 417. He looked at me and said, we called Trent back. So we did. This time he told us more. Vanessa had said, he can't find out. It's gone. Then something else. I burned what mattered and kept what protected me. That was when the whole shape of it started locking into place. The tuition payment, the family meeting, the public reveal, the attempt to cut. Eli away from me after the money cleared. She wasn't just trying to humiliate me, she was trying to separate Eli from the only other adult in the story who still had records, memory, and proof. If he walked out of that house hating me, she controlled the rest, but he hadn't. That was the one variable she thought she owned. We called Celia next. I didn't expect loyalty from her, but I expected fear to be moving through Lorraine's house by then, and fear loosens people. Celia admitted she knew Vanessa and Lorraine went to the bank after Marcus died. She said she once saw Vanessa come home with a thick envelope and a small metal tin, lock herself in the guest room, then come out with the envelope thinner and the tin gone. Then Celia dropped the sentence that turned suspicion into motive. Years earlier, Vanessa got drunk and said, if Daniel ever knew how much Marcus left behind, he'd understand why the truth had to stay buried. Money. Of course there was money. Some lies survive because people are vain. The worst lies survive because people are greedy. Now the whole thing looked different. Maybe Vanessa had not only hidden paternity, maybe she had hidden inheritance. Maybe Marcus left something for the child he thought might be his. Maybe letters, instructions, a trust, documents. Something that tied Eli to him in a way that cost Vanessa control, or money, or both. Eli looked sick when that landed. Not because he cared about money, because it meant his own life may have been treated like paperwork, like risk management, like an inconvenient fact inside somebody else's preferred future. We barely slept. At 12:17 in the morning, Vanessa called again. This time I answered on speaker. She demanded to know where Eli was. He answered before I could. I'm right here. She tried all her voices. Hurt mother. Calm adult. Woman managing chaos. Then soft manipulation. Then cold authority. None of them worked. He asked her about the box. She pretended not to know what he meant. Bad move. Guilty people can lie, but panic changes rhythm. He said, the one you and Grandma opened after Marcus died. Silence. Then she shifted into that patronizing tone dishonest parents use when they need time to rearrange facts. There are adult complications I don't understand. Eli answered, you used that line my whole life every time you wanted time to rearrange the truth. That was the moment I realized he had been watching her more closely than either of us knew. She told him to come home so they could talk privately. He said, I am home. That sentence nearly broke me because it was not sentimental. It was not emotional. It was a fact. The next morning, Eli came into my kitchen tired, calmer, and sharper. He made 3 decisions before finishing his coffee. He was still going to college, he was not going from Vanessa's house, and before he left, he wanted every document that belonged to him in his hands so nothing could conveniently disappear. That was when I knew the truth had not crushed him. It had hardened him. Then he said, I'm done protecting people who built their lives on lies. So was I. By 10:30, we were back in my truck heading to Vanessa's house. Not to scream, not to beg, not to negotiate. To collect his things, his paperwork, and whatever the daylight was finally going to force into the open. Vanessa opened the door before I even knocked. She looked wrecked. Bare face, swollen eyes, hair tied back carelessly. She looked like someone who had run out of ways to arrange perception. For 1 second, I saw the woman I married. Not because she looked innocent, because she looked scared in a way that was almost human enough to pity. That was the problem with Vanessa. Her weakness was always real. It just never made her honest. She tried to speak to Eli first. "Baby, no," he said. "Don't start there." He stepped past her into the house. I followed. The place felt different in daylight. Smaller, less impressive. Like all stages do after the audience goes home. Lorraine was at the window before we got all the way inside. "You cannot come in here with this attitude." Eli turned to her and said, with a calm that startled even me, "I'm here for my documents, my things, and the truth. You can decide how expensive the truth gets." That shut her up. He asked for everything. Birth certificate, social security card, passport, school records, vaccination records, financial aid forms, all of it. Vanessa said some of it was filed away. Eli told her he would wait. Celia was there too, standing off to one side, looking tired in a way I had never seen on her before. Maybe conscience had finally found her, maybe not. But she did not defend Vanessa, and that mattered. While Vanessa went upstairs for paperwork, Eli packed the rest of his things. I stayed in the living room where I could see Lorraine, the staircase, and the front door. That was when I noticed the small envelope on the side table near the sofa. It had an old brass key taped inside. My whole body went cold. Safe deposit key. Lorraine saw my eyes land on it and moved too late. I reached it first. She stood up fast. "That doesn't belong to you." "No," I said. "I think it belongs to the truth." She came toward me. "Give me that." I looked at the envelope. On the front, in old black ink, was written 417. Vanessa had reached the middle of the stairs carrying folders when she saw the key in my hand. She stopped so suddenly, one of the folders slipped against the banister. Eli stepped out of the hallway with a duffel bag and saw her face. Then, the key. That was when the room lost the ability to lie well. "What is that?" he asked. No one answered, so I did. "I think it's the key to Marcus Bell's safe deposit box." Vanessa came down the rest of the stairs slowly, clutching the paperwork like she had forgotten why she'd gone up there in the first place. "Daniel," she said, "give me the key." "No, it doesn't prove anything." "Then why are you shaking?" That hit her. Lorraine tried to seize the room. "That box is old. It has nothing to do with Eli." Eli laughed once. "You really shouldn't have taught me to hear panic so well." Vanessa tried something softer then, not innocent. Not exactly. More dangerous than that. She let herself sound tired. "It was complicated." "There it is," Eli said. "The family slogan." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I was trying to protect you." He stepped closer. "No, you were trying to protect what was convenient." Then he held out his hand toward me without taking his eyes off her. "What was in the box?" Vanessa looked at Lorraine. Lorraine looked away. That tiny exchange confessed more than any speech. "What was in the box?" He asked again. Vanessa whispered, "Documents." "What documents?" She shook her head. "Things that didn't matter anymore." Wrong answer. Because Eli was no longer a child and no longer the only person in the room afraid of truth. I stepped in. "You burned some of it." I said, "Celia said you came back with an envelope and a tin. Trent heard you tell Lorraine you burned what mattered and kept what protected you." Vanessa spun toward Celia. "You talked to him?" Celia folded her arms. "You should have been nicer to people who know things." That almost made me smile. Vanessa's composure cracked. Lorraine snapped, "Enough. Nobody's standing in my house accusing us of things they can't prove." Eli turned to her. "That's the thing," he said quietly. "You spent years betting that." Then he looked back at his mother. "Tell me what was in the box." For the first time since I had known Vanessa, she looked like a woman who had finally run out of exits. Her shoulders lowered, not dramatically, just enough. There were letters, she said. My jaw tightened. From Marcus? I asked. Yes. To who? To me. To you. And one addressed to Eli for when he was older. The room went dead. Eli stared at her. You burned a letter addressed to me? Her voice broke. I didn't know what else to do. That was the moment he stopped looking like her son altogether. Not because he yelled, because he became still. You didn't know what else to do, he repeated. She started crying, and maybe some of it was real. Maybe all of it was. But real emotion inside a dishonest person does not make the dishonesty less ugly. It only makes it more pathetic. He wrote that he wanted a test done if anything happened to him, Vanessa said. He wrote that if Eli was his, he wanted money placed in trust. He wrote that he had told his lawyer. After he died, there was confusion. And then She stopped. I finished it for her. And then you got to the box first. She covered her mouth. Lorraine snapped. She was trying to save her family. Eli turned toward his grandmother with a look so cold it silenced even her. By burning my letter? Lorraine had nothing. Vanessa's voice collapsed. I was scared. If the trust got opened, if paternity got questioned, if the affair came out, everything would have been destroyed. I looked at her and asked the only question that mattered. Destroyed for who? She said nothing. That was answer enough. Eli asked the next question himself. How much money? Vanessa shut her eyes. When she answered, her voice was barely audible. 280,000. The number hit the room like a car crash. I don't know which stunned me more. The amount, or how calmly, greed can sit inside a woman who still calls herself protective. Eli looked physically ill. $280,000 was meant to go into a trust if I was his? Yes. And you burned the letter that said that? Tears ran down her face. I thought if I could keep everything buried, no one would get hurt. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he said the line, I will remember until I die. You keep calling it protection because theft sounds too ugly in your own voice. Even Lorraine sat down after that. Vanessa folded into a dining chair like her bones had given up. I wish I could tell you justice arrived like thunder. It didn't. It arrived like proof. Like witnesses. Like a son gathering his own papers while looking at his mother as if she were a stranger renting space in his childhood. He checked every document one by one and put them into his backpack. Then he looked at me. I placed the key in his hand. He closed his fist around it. That money, he said quietly, will be traced. Every letter you burned will be named. Every lie you told will be documented. I don't care if it takes months. I don't care if it takes years. I'm done carrying your secrets. Vanessa sobbed. Lorraine tried one last time. Eli, don't do this to your mother. He looked at her and said, she already did it to herself. Then he turned and walked out. I followed him with the rest of his bags. Nobody stopped us. The truth had finally made the room too heavy for performance. Outside, the August heat hit like a wall. Eli loaded his things into my truck without speaking. When he was done, he stood there with one hand still in his pocket, fingers wrapped around that key. Then he looked at me. She stole from me, he said. Yes. She lied to you. Yes. She burned my letter. Yes. He took one long breath, then another. What happens now? I looked back at the house, at the windows where shadows moved and stopped and moved again, at the porch where last night Vanessa thought she was ending me. Then I looked at my son. Now I said, we stopped letting her decide the story. That afternoon, before anything else, I took him to the bank. Not because we thought they'd open the box on the spot. Procedures existed. Names had to be verified. Estate records had to be requested. Lawyers would have to get involved. But we made the inquiry. We created the paper trail. We put the truth into motion. Then I took him to lunch because legal consequences take time, but grief still needs food. He barely touched his fries. Halfway through the meal, he asked me something quietly. When you found out I wasn't biologically yours, did you ever wish I'd never been born? The question hurt so badly, I set my coffee down too hard. No. He looked at me carefully. Not even when you were angry? No. Not even after the letter? No. Why? Because there are answers that only become simple after you have suffered enough. Because every good thing in my adult life has your fingerprints on it, I said. You are the reason I became safer. You are the reason I stayed steady. You are the reason I learned that love can make a man ashamed of his own worst instincts and then teach him to live differently. His face broke then, not from pain, from relief. And when he cried this time, I let him. In a diner booth, in daylight, in front of strangers who understood enough to mind their own business. When he could breathe again, he nodded once and said, "Okay, that was all, but it was enough." A week later, I drove him to college. Not Vanessa, not Lorraine, me. We loaded his things into the dorm. I helped him make the bed badly and pretended not to notice when he fixed it after me. We bought extra extension cords, a desk lamp, and one of those ugly rolling storage carts every dorm somehow needs and hates. Right before I left, he stood outside the dorm and said, "Whatever happens with the money and the box and the rest of it, none of that changes who raised me." I nodded because that was all I trusted my throat to do. Then he hugged me, strong, certain. No audience needed. Just before he pulled away, he said, "You're my father. She can tell whatever version she wants. I'm done borrowing hers." That was the moment the story finally belonged to the right person. Vanessa kept calling for months, at first crying, then apologizing, then blaming Lorraine, then blaming fear, then, eventually, blaming me for not stopping her sooner. That almost made me laugh. By then, Eli answered only when he chose to, and never privately. Always with the calm of a man who had finally seen the machinery behind the wall. The bank records opened other doors. Estate documents, probate filings, missing declarations, lawyer letters, dead ends. Then smaller openings. Enough to confirm that Marcus had intended a trust-pending paternity confirmation, and that Vanessa reached the box before anyone else could act cleanly. Not every burned document could be resurrected. Not every stolen year could be refunded. But by then, the thing she most wanted to keep had already slipped out of her hands. Not the money, the narrative, the image, the role. The years of being seen as the complicated woman doing her best. That burned faster than the papers she destroyed. Family began whispering, then speaking openly, then choosing sides. Celia, to her credit, told the truth once silence stopped being stylish. Trent, in one of life's stranger reversals, became useful. Lorraine aged 10 years in 6 months, mostly from discovering that authority without credibility is just noise in pearls. The last time I saw Vanessa in person, she looked at me across a courthouse hallway and said, "You always wanted to look like the hero." I told her the truth. "No, I just got tired of carrying your villainy for you." She flinched harder at that than she ever did at shouting, because shouting can be dismissed. Accuracy can't. People ask whether I hate her. The honest answer is not clean. For a while, yes, then less, then differently. Now what I mostly feel is something colder than hate and more useful than forgiveness. Clarity. She did not destroy me, she delayed me. She did not break the bond between me and my son. She tested whether it was built from blood or from years. And in the end, that was the one contest she was always going to lose. Because blood can start a story, but it cannot stay up at night with a fever. It cannot teach a boy to drive in an empty church parking lot. It cannot answer midnight calls, show up with jumper cables, sit through bad school concerts, pay tuition, keep every ugly piece of paper because one day the truth might need a witness, or look at a frightened 13-year-old and decide love matters more than pride. Love did that. I did that. And when my son walked away from his mother's lies with a safe deposit key in his pocket and still called me dad, every secret she buried finally ran out of grave, that is how the story ends. Not with her confession, not with the money, not even with the box. It ends with this. She spent years protecting a lie. I spent years protecting a boy. And when the truth finally came for both of us, only one of those choices still had a son standing beside it.